Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to day 2 of the STEMX Education Conference. I guess it depends on where you are in the world, but for those of us in North America, it's morning of day 2. For those in the UK, Iris, is it late afternoon?
Lunch.
Lunch. Iris Lapinski is our keynote speaker. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks to the conference sponsors. They don't get much visibility. They're behind the scenes, but they provide us with the ability to hold this event for free. So this is their one moment of recognition. We really appreciate all that they have done. This is the chance for those of you who are in our small, early morning in the U.S. listening audience. Look for the star to the left of the map. Click on it twice, then click on the map. Feel free to just put a note in the chat, time, temperature, where you are in the world. And I'm going to move us forward. Iris, I'm really looking forward to this. I'll turn the time over to you.
Cool. Welcome, everyone. So I hope you can hear me okay. And if you are in very early morning, there seems to be someone in New Zealand as well. I'll try to do my best to explain to you what we do with Apps for Good here in the UK. And I don't think it should take more than maybe sort of half an hour. And then, wow, 11 p.m. So I'll do my best that you don't fall asleep at 11 p.m. at night. That you then, hi everyone, that you then have enough time as well to ask any questions or any sort of things for clarification you may have. So Apps for Good is we call it technology education movement. And what I wanted to do is to take you through the background, the thinking of Apps for Good, give you some examples, maybe even share some links with you so you can at some point in your own time look at some of the videos we have on our YouTube channel as well. Rather than taking you to a web tour, I tried that and it didn't seem to have worked particularly well. So Apps for Good is underpinned by 3 big pillars, and they're sort of our key principles. The roots of Apps for Good actually lie in Brazil, in the favelas in Rio. So the gentleman you see in the drawing on the left, his name is Paulo Ferreira, and he was an educator in Brazil in the 70s. And the organization behind us that initially started a lot of the technology education work in Brazil is called CDI. Paulo Ferreira's Pedagogy, I don't know how many of you are familiar with him. The way how I explain what he did is that his thinking was that people learn best when they answer questions they have in their own lives. And if they learn knowledge and gain understanding, that really helps them to lead their lives in a more productive, interesting or efficient way. So that is a lot of the pedagogy that underpins what we do. Yeah, I can type that. And that is that rather than the role of the teacher, and I'll talk about that in more detail, it's not to give answers, but to ask the right questions. The second big pillar we have is then, as a consequence of that, that we ask students who always work in teams of 3 to 5 students to basically come up with problems they're passionate about by talking to their friends, by talking to their neighbors, looking around in their community, but to pick a problem they feel strongly about and they've encountered directly, indirectly themselves. And then the third big pillar is technology. So we now have, yes, it's the pedagogy of the oppressed. We now have 3 big pillars as part of the course we run, and that is around mobile social web. So whereas CDI's model in Brazil was very much about using technology, with Apps for Good, we've made the next leap to actually create and make things, and particularly software. So those are the 3 big pillars. And then to give you an example of that before I go into the sort of structure of the course and how we do it is a student called Mohima. So she was a student on an Apps for Good course in 2011 in a girls' school in East London. And the problem she and her fellow students picked was that a lot of their parents only speak Bengali and have a Bengali background and don't speak English, whereas all of her teachers spoke English. So when there were parent-teacher conferences, the people who had to translate the communication tended to be the girls. And that worked pretty well when the message was, you're doing great, your exam results are great. But it didn't work so well when it was about, you're late, you need to work harder, etc. So the app they then created is called Transit, and it covers all of the key areas you would find in the standard parent-teacher conference situation around homework, behavior, etc. And they initially wanted to do something technically really complex, but actually then boiled it down to a hierarchy of themes, specific sentences, and you can click on that as a sound file, and it goes both ways. There's some questions for parents that you can read in Bengali, and you can hear them in English, and the other way around. And I wanted to share, I'll put that in the chat, we have a short video which you can watch in your own time, where Mohima talks about that for sort of 90 seconds. So if you
Iris,
want,
do you want me to try doing it as a web tour?
You can give it a go if it works. If people, yeah, maybe we can give it a go.
Okay, so if it doesn't pull up for you in the web tour, click on that link. We've had some success with the web tour this past day.
Okay.
I think today is really important because it's helping us network a lot, like as girls and as people whose apps have just been on the market. Like I've spoken to so many people today, and I've made loads of contacts, and everyone's just been really supportive, and it's really helped us learn how to network and talk to people, and it's really helped us promote our apps. And I just think it's really important that we have stuff like this because it encourages us as young girls to realize that we can have a career in technology, and it's not just a sort of male thing that only guys can do, and anyone can do it if they're interested and you have the passion for it. Our app is an English to Bengali translator specifically for parent-teacher conferences, and what it does is it helps parents and teachers parents who can't communicate.
Iris, I turned your mic off because we were hearing the video back through your microphone, so you'll have to turn your mic back on.
Does that work now? Can you hear me again?
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry for not switching that. So that was Mohima, and she. The interesting thing now is she's now studying engineering at Imperial College in London, and the key thing about the app she described as well, they had sort of one key insight, and that was that parent-teacher conferences are actually not open-ended conversations, and as a result of that, they could create quite a simple technical implementation. So by now, there is sort of one example of an app we've done. By now, we have this year about 20,000 students in the UK on courses. On the right, you see the map. It covers pretty much large parts of the United Kingdom. Students always work in teams of 3 to 5, so we're expecting that they'll be working on about 4,000 to 5,000, 7,000 app ideas this year. And on the left, you can see the high-level structure of the course, and I'll talk you through that. So the course framework we now have is about a 30 to 50 hour course, effectively around new product development. And one of the things Mohima was referring to in her video was to say that a lot of women don't get into tech, and the reason why we have the title above called Coding with a Purpose has as much to do with my personal background as it has to do with the course, and that is that I'm a failed engineer. I excelled in science, technology, engineering, maths in school. I even learned some programming, I think, when I was 14 as an after-school club, then started with engineering at uni and dropped out after 4 months. There were 2 reasons for that. The first one was I had to program digital clocks for about 4 months, and I said, if I have to do this for 4 years, I will die of boredom. And the second thing was there were very few women, so there was also a social aspect where everyone else in the room already had been coding for years and was terribly excited about it for its own sake. And it just didn't feel like my crowd. So what we're now teaching in the course, and what I believe that most people who are not per se geeks are interested in, it doesn't mean they're not interested in technology, but they need to understand why it's relevant for themselves and for their own lives. So what we do with the course framework now, the first module we now have in the new course framework is effectively a crash course, where we take you through our key app building tools, the key processes around new product development, and the key lessons we've learned, including transit, including stop and search, and many of the other apps we've done over the past 4 years. And then student teams jump into module 2, which is idea generation and screening. So here we ask them to think about their community, their friends, their parents, brothers and sisters, anyone they know, and what problems they have. And pick an initial list of problems they're really passionate about, and then do high-level screening, so there are no obvious problems with those ideas. So, give you an example: if a team comes up with an app to say we want to learn how to play better rugby, you do a quick search on YouTube and you find about 180,000 videos that explain to you how to play rugby. And the key question then is, how is your idea addressing something that hasn't been solved yet? Teams then pick 2 to 3 ideas they are really passionate about, but also that haven't been immediately killed by that high-level superficial screening exercise, and then take it to scoping. There are 3 areas as part of that module. One is about the market, the other is about the users, and the third one is designing a solution. The market is going back into far more depth about what are alternatives, who are our true competitors, what is the size of the market we're actually addressing. The users is about speaking to users, and I think over the past few years we've become increasingly radicalized in our thinking about user research. So we've abolished, for example, things like user personas, because the consequences of user personas was that students created a user persona, for example, of a 35-year-old housewife who lives in South London, and created a fictional character they had never met, with needs that didn't exist, and as a consequence they created a product that no one was interested in. So as part of the course now, we actually ask students to talk to 5 real human beings who have an address, a phone number, and they can sort of really engage with. So if there's a student team who wants to do an app on for blind people, they have to speak with 5 blind people and really understand if the idea they have, if the problem they have identified actually really exists in their life, and whether that's something they would really use. And then in terms of the solution, there are 2 big areas we've encountered that tend to kill ideas as well. One is around data and one is around technical feasibility. So if you have an idea of an app where every single plant on Earth is mapped, the question is, where will the data come from? Because if you don't have the data, then this type of app is totally useless. And there are other app ideas where people expect users to create data, And there again, there is it's a quite difficult question to answer on who's going to create the data and who is actually motivated to do it. So, to give you an example, if you want to see all local music recording studios in your area because you don't know them, the question is, why do the people who do know those studios actually have an interest in creating that data in the first place? And then around technical feasibility, Transit was a good example for that, is often about making sure you create a solution that is as simple as possible and really addresses the essence of your problem. That's sort of the scoping thing. With that, hopefully by the end of that module, then they have one idea they feel strongly passionate about, where they understand the users, where there's a clear sort of need in the market and something they can build. And then they move to the next stage called product development. There they then create at least one feature that is possible and essential to their problem. And we have different tools, and that depends on the knowledge of the teacher and the knowledge of the students on what they use. The lowest entry tier is a interactive wireframing tool called Balsamic, where you can create animated prototypes. The next tier then is what we call building blocks, so tools like App Inventor from MIT and AppShed. Then the next tier is around web development, so HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then the last tier we currently have is, and that depends on your existing knowledge of web development, is using the Facebook API to create a social app. And then that takes you into the whole world of APIs. With one feature built, then the two other things we asked them to think about during that module is picking a business model. And there we've basically simplified it down to say there are three big areas of business models, and that is everyone pays, someone else pays, or some users pay. And you can derive every other business model underneath, whether that is affiliate marketing, freemium models, subscription models, based on those high-level ideas. So the task of the students is to pick the one that fits their idea best. Whether that's a sponsorship model, a government model, a donation model, a subscription model, a marketing model, we don't mind as long as it fits their idea. And what they then also have to do to validate that is to get 5 pledges of real human beings, so ideally going back to the 5 users they've spoken to, and say, if it's a direct business model, if it's an indirect business model, 5 businesses who might be interested in advertising, go to them and say, here's a sheet of paper, put in the amount of money you're prepared to pay. If I build this product, can you please sign and date it? And what we've learned is that this is an extremely good filter, because people who might tell you initially they're interested in your product will refuse to sign this form. And then the last part of our course is that students create a pitch presentation and can submit it to the competition we run around thematic categories, hopefully going forward also around technical categories, where they have to present what they've done in public, and that can be locally, or if they make it into the finals of our competition in front of a relatively large public in, at the moment, in central London. Because the other thing we think is essential is that if you can't articulate what you're working on, no one will ever buy your product, invest in your product, and you can't be successful. So that's sort of in a nutshell the whole structure of the course we're running against this year. So it's very much sort of an integrated software product development course. Talking about a bit more in terms of the audience and how we actually work with. So we at the moment primarily work through educators and schools. We have a train-the-trainer model where we don't deliver courses ourselves, but teachers in schools, primarily secondary schools. We have some primary schools in the UK as well. So secondary is, I think, 12 to 18, I think is the age range. So it's probably the equivalent of middle and high school in the US. However, they are not on their own and they are not alone in running that course. What they can do is they can request experts at different points in time in the course around user experience and design, around web development, around business models, around marketing. So we've now built a community of, I think, over 450 people who work in the tech industry who dial in or come into the school in person. The vast majority do it remotely via Skype and Google Hangout. And they then basically listen to the ideas the students pitch to them and ask them questions and provide feedback based on their knowledge and area of expertise. The third big audience we have are corporate partners and funders, so we are registered non-profit, and as a consequence of that, we work with primarily technology businesses or businesses that are being transformed by technology. So technology business like, as you can see, Google, SAP, Facebook, BlackBerry, etc. Or people like the Financial Times, which is a newspaper in the UK, or Thomson Reuters, big information company, or Barclaycard, which is a payment company, because they have huge tech teams and are actually driven by technology. And then the fourth big audience we work with are students and alumni. We don't directly work with students, as mentioned, but we do now have sort of a plan to stay in touch with them once they complete the course. Those are the four big audiences, and a lot of the value we actually create is connecting those audiences, and we've built a technology platform behind them to make that easy. The next thing I wanted to refer to is coming back to Paulo Ferreira and the pedagogy and thinking behind it, is how we think about the role of the teacher. On the left, I think you can see the sort of very typical traditional model that it's the teacher at the whiteboard, similar to what I'm doing now. It's like you disseminate his or her wisdom, pearls of wisdom to people who are listening without really understanding who the audience is, what their interest is, and what they need. What you can see on the right is the model you can't see the guys on the rock perfectly well, just realizing, but the students you see on the right is basically a team of 3 students climbing a rock. The educator is the person on the ground who holds the rope. So when they fall, they don't hit the ground as hard as they would in real life. And the expert is the person who's traveled the journey before and can give advice on what to look out for, what are sort of the obvious mistakes. The truth is, however, every educator will have between 3 to 5 different teams actually climbing different rocks. Because the ideas are picked by the students, they could work on a civil rights app, they could work on a game, they could work on a dog obesity app, on an app about parents make promises and don't keep them. We don't limit that, so as a consequence of that, the role of the teacher is quite challenging. The benefit of students picking their own problems, however, also is that they feel a real sense of ownership. And we experienced that at this year's awards as well. So those teams, for example, didn't make it into the shortlist, then sent us messages from Facebook and said, we're really passionate about our app. How could it be that you didn't accept it? What have we done wrong, etc. And we provided quite a lot of feedback to those teams as well. Here's a little bit in terms of who we're reaching. As I said, like we now have over 20,000 students during this cycle, so the cycle that just started in September, so 2013-14. We started out with 47 students in 2010-2011. In terms of who we reach, we did, in terms of the audience we reached last year, and we're just completing the baseline survey for this school year now. 52% of our students were girls. And I said, like, that comes from the purpose, because at the end of the day, if students and girls are interested in solving problems, and technology is an amazing way to do it, once they've figured out what they want to solve. In terms of ethnic background, we have sort of a higher proportion as well, and in terms of poor backgrounds, we've been tracking some of that, and I think one of the challenges for us going forward is to make sure we don't gentrify and not only work with well-off students, but we have a particular focus. But on the other hand, we don't want to make it exclusive only for low-income communities, because if we do our job well, it should be attractive for everyone. Something specifically about the UK, which not everyone might be interested in, but there's been a big policy change in the UK which helped us, and as a consequence of that, what we're doing, the way how schools are implementing what we do, has shifted dramatically from the previous year to last year. Initially, it was very much an out-of-school after-club activity, and last year now the vast majority was part of the timetable, because there is a relatively open curriculum now in the UK for ICT learning. In terms of impact, I've given you sort of the framework around the different modules, and we start to do sort of collect feedback from students directly, and we are improving even more of that sort of now to collect more data and really understand what students and teachers learn. But it tends to, for students, fall into categories around technology and entrepreneurial skills, around confidence, but also about better understanding what they're good at and what they're bad at. That could mean that you realize you don't want to work in tech, or you could realize that you actually think you're interested in marketing. We are not on a mission to create the next generation of coders, but we do want to, in general, increase the literacy about what it does mean to make things, to make an informed choice. And as I said, like, it is, I think, a relatively challenging journey for teachers as well, because of our emphasis on student-led problem definition and learning. So just sort of to quickly wrap it up and then hopefully move to a lot of your questions. So our vision now is to create a new global generation of problem solvers and makers. We've started now to run a small pilot in the US with 4 schools in Seattle and Washington State. They found us. We didn't find them, and they're now testing that with 1 middle school, and the other 3 are high schools in that state. We're also starting to share our content with a relatively large number of schools in Catalonia, and we're now sort of exploring a model where we effectively open source all of the content knowledge we have, and as part of the new course framework, I'll share that now in the chat as well, we have a sequence of expert talks and of founder talks that are directly integrated into the course, but they're also completely public, that cover different areas of the course. Experts told us they felt were not covered in the right way. And the founders' talks are basically very short inspirational talks by some of the most successful technology founders in the UK, hopefully going forward globally, people like Richard Branson or Shaq Khan from Spotify or Martha Fox, who did lastminute.com, where they basically think about how they started out in school, because no one ever started running $1 billion business. They started quite small. So the interesting thing for me was when doing those interviews, it said Richard Branson did a student magazine protesting against the Vietnam War. Martha Fox did a dating agency because she wanted to know who fancies whom in school, and that was the best way to do it. Other people sold lighters, sunglasses, or they didn't know they were entrepreneurs, and it took them until they were later on in their 20s to figure it out. So those are sort of 2 other things to share with you. Steve, based on your experience, what is the best way to sort of start questions and answers and sort of have a discussion?
So if you have a question, you can certainly put it in the chat. And if you'd like to raise your hand, you can take the microphone. I think I'll give microphone privileges to everybody, so if anybody wants to grab the mic, you can just grab the mic.
Great. Any questions based on what I've said? Anything that you want to hear more of? Anything you disagree with, you're worried about? There's one question in the chat saying, do you have plans to expand? So the answer is yes, and there'll be 2 tracks for that. One is through our open source content. So we're now finishing the complete overhaul of that course, and then we're making our course public as long as you give us an email address so we know who you are and can actually ask you a question afterwards based on a Creative Commons license, and that license will be non-commercial share-like attribute, so for non-commercial use, completely free. If you build on top of it, you share it back and you give us some credit for it. And most of the images you've seen in this presentation actually underneath in my notes, they're links, because they all come, many of them come from Flickr, for example, using exactly that license. There was someone who raised their hand as well. No hand raised anymore. Android apps. Well, we've moved to cross-platform now. So we initially started out with a tool called App Inventor for Android, which was created initially by Google Labs, now sits with the MIT Media Lab, and that is focused on Android. It's a drag-and-drop tool built on Scratch. But we've moved away from a single tool to a portfolio approach based on the knowledge of the teacher. So as a consequence of that, we now teach web development in the course. So the starting point for that is HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We have other tools like AppChat, for example, where you can then start programming in JavaScript as well, but a lot of it is drag and drop. And then things around Facebook API, web-based as well. From our point of view, and if you look at what's happening in industry right now, that more and more people are moving away from native apps to highly mobile optimized websites, and things like Mozilla launching Firefox OS, for example, is also pretty much, you can do many more things in the browser now, accessing native functions on your phone like camera and maps and other things than you could do 3-4 years ago when we started out. And then there was a second question about whether they're available for the public or for the orgs. The apps, we have some of the apps we have on our website. You can just go on appsogood.org and they take you to the Android/BlackBerry apps. Those are award-winning apps. So we're now moving away from the model where students only create prototypes and then if they win the awards, they match with professional developers. We still do that, but now we actually want to see more and more students create their own simple prototypes, even if they're a bit lower quality, but to actually give them the ability to not only think about an app and design it, but to make it as far as they can. Let me see if there were more questions. I might have missed more. Failed engineer, well, I don't know. My father is a geek, so the way how I distinguish, I think about splitting the world as people who are geeks and people who are non-geeks. And my definition of a geek is someone who falls in love with technology for technology's sake. I'm certainly not in that camp. My father is, and many people who teach technology or go into computing classes are already in love with technology before they actually ever go into a classroom or go to uni. I think the vast majority of women and the vast majority of men, to be honest, are people who need to see a reason why they should use their phones, why they should use their computers. So that's why, on one level, I might be failed, but I'm not desperate about that. Other things in the chat. We know of TechSoup. CDI in Chile, actually, for example, is part of the TechSoup network. So I'm very aware of them. And here in the UK, there is an organization that's part of the TechSoup network called the Charity Technology Trust. What's the best way to get involved? It depends what your background is. You can always sign up as an expert on our website if you want to listen to pitches from students and ask them difficult questions and give them feedback. That's relatively easy. We've built an app on LinkedIn, so it syncs with your professional information as well. If you want to teach the course, we have some, they're slightly outdated because they're not yet revised for the new course framework, that the new versions will go live in the next few weeks. We have some taster sessions on our website around getting started, primarily around idea generation and balsamic wireframes. And I said, like, we're now working on, as part of the relaunch and revisit of the course, because we've gone through, I think, 7 iterations now over the past 4 years of fixing the course. We will have a new user group launching. We're still setting timelines, but pretty much before the end of the year, where you can then access all of the content we have, all of the exercises, all of the teacher presentations on our site as well. Why is the registration closed for 2013-14 in the UK? Because we had to train the teachers, and what we wanted to see from them as well is how they're doing the planning for the course. So because the vast majority of schools integrate into the timetable now, we wanted to make sure they spend some time thinking about it. As I said, like, the new tier will open up, will be initially for content only, and then once we can manage more demand, to open it up on a sort of ongoing cycle. But this year we had, I think, 10 train-the-trainer sessions up and down the UK, from Scotland to Northern Ireland to North England, South England, a lot in London, for teachers not only to learn about the course, but the other thing we've learned is that, at least for the time being, it's as important to have a community of peers, so they can actually ask questions not only to us but to other teachers and who are running the course, and learn from them. And that's one of the things we're now also exploring, how we can take more of that online. We still think there is sort of a face-to-face interaction between teachers, so they can help each other on redefining their professional, how they act as profession, how they think about themselves as educators. Don't know if that answers the question. Was there any other questions? No other questions.
Iris, I have a question.
Yeah?
What's your own personal history with Pedagogy of the Oppressed? Was it something that you read before and informed the work, or was it something that you encountered afterwards?
I encountered it as part of me understanding what parts of the CDI model in Brazil should be transferred to the UK. So the story is basically in 2008 I met the person. CDI in Brazil was very successful. Rodrigo founded CDI, won a lot of awards in the social entrepreneurship sphere, from Skoll to Ashoka to Avena to the World Economic Forum to Tech Museum. And people then, they said you need to spread that beyond Latin America. There are now, I believe, 10 countries in Latin America that are part of the CDI network. And there was a question to say, okay, if we take it outside, where should we go? And the initial idea was to set up a fundraising office in the UK. And as that happened in 2008, and what then, however, became clear is that while fundraising from London to Brazil was actually relatively complex, there was a lot of interest in the pedagogy from Paulo Ferreira in the UK. So I looked at it. I think there are some things within the pedagogy of the oppressed which are very specific to the 70s. But I said, like, if you take that historical context out and you think about that education is never neutral and it's always about power relationships in society, I think there's a lot of it that can be taken into the 21st century as well. So that's how I looked at it. And not necessarily followed religiously, but there's also I can dig that out. There's actually a quite amazing video between Paulo Ferreira and an American computer scientist from early 2000s. I was shared with like only recently, who talk about computers, and it was interesting to see because I'd never there's nothing really mentioned in the pedagogy of the press around technology, but that video talk was actually really interesting, making the link between the two. And thanks for signing up as an expert, Nick. That's great.
I was interested because Seymour Papert, Ivan Illich, Paulo Ferreira, there's a kind of set of thinkers from the 70s, early 80s that feels like are becoming pretty current again.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And the irony is, for example, Paulo Ferreira isn't particularly popular in Brazil, I've been told at the moment. So I think there are always cycles of ideas, and it's a bit like with names of children. It's like they become outdated, and then they become so outdated that they become popular again. Any other questions?
I'm so glad you were here today.
Thank you.
Yes, I think we'll wrap up. We'll give a final call for questions, but in the absence of that, thanks, Iris.
Well, thank you very much for joining. It's been my first attempt to do this type of webinar. I hope it wasn't too top-down, front-style, but it's quite hard to respond to an audience you can't even fully see, apart from names.
So there, obviously there's a place for communicating information. However, don't feel too apologetic. The whole conference is about practitioners giving presentations. So there's an enormous amount of the pedagogy that you believe in that takes place here.
Brilliant. That's great. So thank you for having me. And for those people who have a very early morning start, I hope you have a great rest of the day. And for those people who joined at 11 p.m., I hope you have a good night.
Thanks, Iris. Thanks, everybody.